House Joint Resolution 60, Joint Resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title V United States Code of the rules submitted by the National Park Service relating to Glen Canyon National Recreation Area motor vehicles.
Pursuant to House Resolution 354, the joint shall be debated for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or the respective designees. The gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on H.J. Res. 60.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of H.J. Res. 60, led by Representative Malloy. This is an important effort that will overturn an onerous and unnecessary regulation designed to restrict off-highway vehicle access and recreational use of the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. House Republicans are committed to pursuing a comprehensive approach to restoring multiple use and public access to our federal lands, one that favors common sense land management and prioritizes community buy-in over preservationist policies that are cooked up here in Washington, D.C. As chairman of the Committee on Natural Resources, I've often said that some of our most meaningful work is in increasing access to our public lands, and it will maybe never be a headline on Fox News or CNN, but it will make the front page of your local paper. Established by Congress in 1972 to enhance public recreation, the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area is a premier tourist destination that offers world-class, water-based, backcountry, and off-highway recreation opportunities. Off-highway vehicle recreation predates the recreation area's establishment and has allowed visitors for generations to explore some of the most remote and beautiful stretches of this remarkable landscape. Consistent with this history, the National Park Service issued a rule in 2021 that expanded the permissible use of off-road vehicles throughout Glen Canyon. But groups quickly sued, leading the Biden administration to enter into a hasty and secretive settlement against the wishes of local communities. Under that agreement, the Park Service issued a revised rule in the waning days of the Biden administration that restricts motorized uses in Glen Canyon, overturning decades of precedent and severely restricting public access and recreation opportunities. Under this new rule, dozens of miles of popular trails and shorelines are closed off to highway vehicles in what the state of Utah called de facto wilderness management. Even small road closures can have profound consequences for public access. For example, the National Park Service effectively cut off access to the adjacent 1.45 million acre Henry Mountains Travel Management Area by closing just 1/2 mile of road in the new rule. Some of the most popular trails in this area, including the Flint Trail and Poison Spring Loop that are pictured behind me, were also shut down under this rule. What's especially nonsensical about this is that these trails aren't even maintained by the National Park Service. The local county maintains them. These restrictions are unnecessary and frankly lack common sense. Many of these routes are restricted to off-highway vehicles and remain open to conventional vehicles. This creates public safety concerns by incentivizing the use of vehicles that are not meant to handle rough terrain and rugged trails. Restricting off-highway vehicles also disproportionately affects disabled individuals who often rely on ATVs or side-by-sides to gain access to remote areas of our public lands. The state of Utah compared the decision to limit off-highway vehicles while still allowing for conventional vehicles as akin to designated parts of Lake Powell exclusively for yachts while restricting more accessible fishing boats and kayaks to less desirable sections of the lake. In totality, this rule ensures that only the most able-bodied and wealthy will be able to have access to areas of Glen Canyon that used to be open and accessible to everyone. Utah boasts $9.5 billion of outdoor recreation economy driven largely by motorized recreation. By shutting down some of the state's most popular motorized recreation trails, the National Park Service is shutting down a main engine of economic growth in some of the poorest, most rural counties. Earlier this year, Congress passed the first ever bipartisan comprehensive recreation package aimed at growing, not restricting, our nation's $1.1 trillion outdoor recreation economy. The Explore Act passed unanimously in both House and Senate. That is a rare feat that demonstrates the overwhelming support for opening more of our public lands to outdoor recreation, not locking up our lands and throwing away the key. In keeping with that, I strongly urge my colleagues to vote yes on this important joint resolution, which will restore off-highway vehicle access to treasured public lands. I want to again thank Congresswoman Malloy for her excellent work and leadership on this effort, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This resolution would nullify a National Park Service rule that manages motor vehicle use within the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. It is a common sense rule that this resolution targets, and it outlines where cars and off-road vehicles are allowed to travel within the boundaries of the National Recreation Area. Shouldn't be controversial, shouldn't be political. The Glen Canyon National Recreation Area is a very popular destination. It offers ample opportunities for backcountry exploration across 1.25 million acres of public land. To put that in perspective, this area is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. And now the National Park Service is tasked with managing park units in a manner that balances public access and enjoyment while ensuring responsible stewardship of the natural environment. That's their job. Achieving that balance can be a tall order under the best of circumstances. It has become even more difficult as the Trump administration works to dismantle the National Park Service. More than 12.5% of the entire workforce has left the agency since Donald Trump took office. It's only been a little more than 100 days, and we are already down 2,000 rangers and park employees. House Republicans have stood by and watched, and now they are proposing a resolution that undermines national park management even further. As a reminder, this resolution would repeal a rule that manages all motorized vehicle access within Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, a unit of the Park Service that is home to very fragile ecosystems like the Orange Cliffs adjacent to Canyonlands National Park and countless cultural and archaeological resources. Initial planning started way back in 2007 and was not finalized until the first Trump administration published an overly permissive record of decision in 2018. A court determined that that 2018 version of the rule did not do enough to consider the environmental consequences of allowing off-road vehicles on certain roads. So the Park Service went back to work, and they published a new rule that achieved a better balance. The updated rule, which is being targeted today, balances visitor use and access with the long-term stewardship and management of park resources. And despite some of the rhetoric that we may hear from the other side of the aisle, the Park Service did not shut off access to off-road vehicles. Nothing could be further from the truth. The rule allows off-road vehicles on 388 miles of road within the park, only closing access to approximately 6% of the existing roadways to protect sensitive resources. And even those roads are still open to cars, Jeeps, and other street legal vehicles. They're just closed to vehicles that have the ability to travel off-road and cause severe damage in proposed wilderness and other sensitive landscapes. So that's 94% of the roads in this Park Service unit open to motor vehicles, including off-road vehicles, and then just 6% where only street legal vehicles are allowed. That's a very reasonable trade-off that protects the park for future generations. And it's also worth noting that Congress has never used the Congressional Review Act in the way it's being used right now to repeal a Park Service decision of this nature. This is meddling and micromanaging at its worst, and it could have some unintended consequences, as we will discuss in the course of this debate. When Congress uses the CRA to repeal a rule, then the agency is prohibited by law from issuing a substantially similar rule on the same topic. And so the decision to repeal this rule could lead to some unintended consequences that would backfire on the very off-road vehicle community that my friends across the aisle are saying that they're trying to protect. Park managers would be unable to change or alter access even if a proliferation of off-road vehicle use is damaging park resources. That's the downside from the environmental perspective. But even worse, from the perspective of these off-road vehicles, it could mean an end to all off-roading in Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. You see, Park Service has to have a rule in place if they want to authorize any access. That's what this rule does. So if Congress repeals it and the CRA says no replacement rule can be issued, that's how it works. It's like Cortez when he got to Mexico. He burned the boats so nobody would go back. That's how the CRA works. You burn the bridge, you can't go back on that particular subject area. Well, a court in the future may well decide that the absence of a rule means no off-roading, period. And you know what? It's the kind of uncertainty that would be discussed and fleshed out if you took the time to have a hearing and have a little bit of deliberation instead of jamming a CRA like this, a blunt instrument, right to the House floor. If the intent is truly about preserving access, there are better ways to do it. There is certainly much better ways for Congress to uplift and support our national parks, for example, standing up to Donald Trump and Elon Musk's gutting of the National Park Service, and I wish we spent more time talking about that rather than a very reckless use of the Congressional Review Act. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Huffman reserves. Mr. Westerman, you are recognized.
And Mr. Speaker, I just want to point out that the idea that passing this Congressional Review Act would restrict all off-road vehicle access is just not right. That's not going to happen. There was a rule in place before the Biden administration put the new rule in place. We've vetted this with Congressional Research Service. We would simply go back to the rule that was in place that was working fine before the Biden administration came in and put this onerous rule in place. Also, the argument's been made that only 24 out of 388 miles have been restricted to off-vehicle road use. But as we all know, roads are networks. For instance, there's a half-mile section in this ruling under the Biden administration that blocks off access to over 1 million acres. So you block off a half mile of road and you restrict use to 1 million acres. I don't think that's what most people would call public access or would agree that it's the way that we should be managing our federal lands, and especially an area that when it was established, part of its goal was to be able to ride off-road vehicles, to have a place to recreate. So with that, I will recognize the gentlelady from Utah, the lead sponsor of the legislation, for 5 minutes. I'll yield her 5 minutes, Ms. Malloy.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this resolution, H.J. Res. 60, which provides congressional disapproval under the Congressional Review Act of the rules submitted by the National Park Service on the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area pertaining to motor vehicles. The National Park Service finalized a rule that restricts off-road vehicles and all-terrain vehicles, ORVs and ATVs, to access certain areas within the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area in my district. This would prohibit access to approximately 24 miles of road, as the chairman has said, including popular trails near the Orange Cliffs and segments of Poison Springs Loop. I've spent a lot of time on the ground in these areas with local elected officials who, for years, have tried to generate a better experience for visitors to the Orange Cliffs, and this goes in the wrong direction. Wayne and Garfield counties are counties that struggle in a state that otherwise thrives. Utah has a really strong economy, but these rural counties have really weak economies, and the reason the rural counties struggle is because the land, almost all of the land in their counties, is managed by the federal government. The federal government can make rules that restrict access to parts of their county over their objections. These roads we're talking about are important to those residing in Wayne and Garfield counties and the tourists who come here from all over the world. They've used these paths to get to places that are part of their history and part of their recreation for generations. The road restrictions reflect a pattern of access loss that characterizes the problems with having a distant federal government make local rules. People from across the world come to experience the unique opportunities these trails offer. The rule threatens to sever these connections, leaving communities to bear the brunt of its consequences. This is in a beautiful part of a gorgeous state, but it's not easy to get to. Keep in mind this is a recreation area, not a preservation area. Mr. Chairman, the people of Utah deserve better. They deserve a government that listens, that respects their tradition, and that understands the importance of balancing conservation with access. Glen Canyon National Recreation Area is very popular, as my colleague across the aisle pointed out. The Orange Cliffs area is not well traveled. Much like the rural counties are struggling in a state that's thriving, the Orange Cliffs area is tough to get to in a national recreation area where everybody goes to the lake. It doesn't make sense to close roads and concentrate all of the visitors in those small areas. These nonsensical rules that make bureaucrats feel better don't help Utahns and are a symptom of the problem of having a distant and disinterested landlord with an agenda. That's why I introduced HJ Res 60, a resolution that leverages the Congressional Review Act to overturn this misguided rule. The resolution is not just about restoring access to trails, it's about standing up for the rights of my constituents, protecting local economies, and preserving freedoms that define our nation. Let us be clear, conservation and access are not mutually exclusive. We can protect our natural heritage while ensuring that Americans can go see it and enjoy it. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this resolution. We should send a message that we stand with the people of Wayne and Garfield counties, the people of Utah, and the people who like to recreate on our public lands. We value their voices, and we won't allow bureaucratic overreach to dictate our way of life. Together, we can ensure that Glen Canyon remains a place of freedom, adventure, and opportunity for generations to come, and isn't a hindrance to the local economies. And with that, I yield back.
I appreciate the gentlewoman for her efforts on this legislation and for being a voice for her constituents. She talked about the county governments there that didn't have a voice when this rule was made. This is hurting their economy. It doesn't make sense, and it's kind of a bad example of how having that distant landlord with an alternative agenda that lives many miles away, managing the land where you live. So thank you for your efforts on behalf of your constituents and on all Americans who enjoy outdoor recreation. Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close and continue to reserve my time.
Very good. Mr. Huffman, are you prepared to close?
After a few more insightful remarks, Mr. Speaker, yes.
Good. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I stand by what I said a few minutes ago. Without the rule in place or a replacement rule, off-roading could very well be illegal in all of Glen Canyon. And I did expect that my colleagues across the aisle would state that they assume the Park Service would simply revert back to a previous rule. Now, I don't know for sure because Republicans didn't hold a hearing on the legislation to bring in a witness from the Park Service to answer any questions, but there's two problems with this assumption they seem to be proceeding under. And one, the current rule was issued under a settlement agreement to enforce compliance with environmental protection laws. Repealing that rule doesn't repeal those legal obligations. So whatever outdated rule the administration might try to revive will still have to comply with those laws, and a court is going to strike it down when it doesn't. Two, as we keep having to remind our colleagues, using the CRA to repeal a rule doesn't just remove that rule, it also prohibits the agency from ever issuing a substantially similar rule on the same topic. That means any rule regarding off-road access in this park unit. This repeal is practically inviting a court to strike down whatever fallback rule the administration tries reverting to, and when that litigation ensues and they comb through the congressional record to divine the intent of Congress, they'll see pretty plainly that I warned you folks that that was the case, right here on the record. Now, since this information seems new to some of my colleagues, they may be thinking, wait, that can't be right. Wouldn't this sort of thing have happened before? And the answer is no, because Congress has never used the CRA to micromanage a park or a park access rule this narrow in the way that is being proposed with this resolution. The entire scheme is untested, reckless, and ill-advised. So if my colleagues accidentally ban off-roading in Glen Canyon, I hope they're ready to explain that to their constituents, assuming they ever hold town hall meetings again. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would be prepared to close.
The gentleman from California is recognized to close.
Mr. Speaker, I want to urge my colleagues to vote no on this legislation. Last week was National Park Week, an annual tradition meant to honor our deep connection to national parks. President Trump carried on the tradition by issuing a proclamation to officially designate the week. This is one of the few non-controversial actions in the first 100 days of this administration because all Americans love and value and support national parks. Unfortunately, the proclamation also highlighted how the administration is trying to use national parks to tell a myopic and narrow view of our history. This revisionist turn is exemplified by President Trump's decision to rename Mount Denali in Alaska, despite overwhelming criticism and concern from Alaska Native leaders and other voices in the state. It's clear that the president is more interested in branding and flashy stunts than actually supporting our national parks and public lands. And House Republicans have stood by and watched as all of this happens. They did nothing as President Trump and Elon Musk decimated the land management workforce, shuttered critical buildings, froze funding for critical grant programs designed to safeguard and restore our parks and our public lands. Just since January, the Park Service has lost 1,700 rangers and park staff, leaving resources vulnerable just before the busiest time of the year. There have to be better ways to celebrate and cherish our national parks than to dismantle them. We could be doing something to restore all the jobs that have been cut by this administration. We could debate proposals to create new parks or expand existing ones to honor our shared history and protect our most cherished landscapes. We could advance comprehensive and thoughtful appropriations bills that invest in the future of our parks and our public lands. Instead of doing any of these productive and responsible actions, House Republicans decided to use some more precious floor time to overturn a narrow and specific rule at the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. That is a disappointment, another missed opportunity, and a testament to the priorities of this Republican majority. With that, Mr. Speaker, I again urge a no vote and yield back.
The gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
And Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that it's unfortunate that we're having to use a Congressional Review Act, but it's unfortunate that a former administration tried to legislate from the administrative branch. And that's the purpose of the Congressional Review Act. When bureaucrats overstep their bounds, we have this tool to rein them back in. Now, it would not allow them to make this rule again, and a clear reading of the Congressional Review Act is easy to see that the rule would go back to the rule that was in place before the Biden administration put the rule in place that we're doing the Congressional Review Act on. It's also common sense that that would happen, and it's clearly the intent of Congress, should this get signed into law, that it would go back to the original rule. Again, I want to applaud Representative Malloy for her exceptional leadership in this effort, for looking out for her constituents. This is a necessary bill that will allow for more recreation opportunities, greater public access, and growth within Utah's outdoor recreation economy. Whether it's hunting, fishing, hiking, or recreating on off-highway vehicles, our public lands were meant to be enjoyed by all Americans, and this CRA allows just that. I urge the adoption of the bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired pursuant to House Resolution 354. The previous question is ordered on the joint resolution. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Resolution providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the National Park Service relating to Glen Canyon National Recreation Area motor vehicles.
The question is on passage of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The joint resolution is passed.
Request the yeas and nays, Mr.
Does what
Speaker.
purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the Chair.